Hello everybody, and welcome to Criken's Critiques. In this new series, I will be analyzing the design choices of popular games and critiquing how these choices affect a player's experience. Today, I'll be looking at Assassin's Creed Unity, which is the most recent game in the Assassin's Creed franchise, where you play a sneaky stabby man that leaps around Paris during the French Revolution. Now, Unity has come under a lot of fire recently by fans and critics alike, but what about the experience has been so disappointing? Well, to begin with, and before we start judging anything, I believe it's important to establish what the design goals of the game and franchise are, specifically what experience the game promises to its player base. Once that's established, we can take a closer look at the gameplay and see how closely it delivers on these design goals. Then we can take a look at the narrative and aesthetic of the game and see if this fits the whole package together. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Unity is the 7th game in the Assassin's Creed franchise and takes place in Paris during the French Revolution. Since this is such an established franchise at this point, it's pretty clear what the design goals of the game hinge on. At its core, Assassin's Creed is really defined by its goal of providing a fantasy simulation where the player embodies a badass assassin. The franchise attempts to achieve these goals by giving you extraordinary abilities that allow you to assassinate your targets with subtlety and finesse. As the franchise has evolved over the years, it has also come to take on a secondary design goal of allowing the player to shape history from the shadows. This goal is demonstrated by the setting of all the recent Assassin's games, as they all take place in some integral moment in time and usually involve well-known historical figures. Now let's take a look at the gameplay of Unity and see if it manages to deliver on these design goals. Well, to begin with, it's worth mentioning that as in all Assassin's Creed games, the world of Unity is a historical simulation. This means that everything you do, at least roughly, follows the events of the past, and that failure on your part is just a glitch. This, on one hand, means you can die over and over and over again without repercussion. But on the other hand, since you're stuck to the track of historical accuracy, and it's all within a game, your own free will doesn't have much significance. Even little deviances from the path of history are kind of punished by the game, by constantly reminding you that, oh, this didn't happen, so don't do it again. The simulation parts of this world are also much more evident in Unity than it is in previous games. For example, at the start of the game, your character is massively underpowered compared to previous games. In order to improve his capabilities, you need to re-sync your character with his former self by spending Assassin's Points, which you earn from completing missions, or paying cash to improve your character overall. Now, aside from being a pretty shameless cash grab, this mechanic doesn't fit with the design goals of making you feel like a badass assassin because most of the time you just feel incomplete. By taking away abilities that had become staples of previous games and forcing the player to unlock them consciously, I felt inherently inferior to the assassin characters of the past. Next up, let's talk about the mobility system. In Unity, Ubisoft changed the system from a hold X to climb everything that was in place for the previous games, to a press space to climb up, press E to climb down. Now, I'm all for change and trying new things, but I've got to say, in most situations, this new system proved to be a liability rather than a benefit. I'm not sure if they changed it because they thought the old system was too passive or easy, but this new system just gets confusing. When you're chasing after an escaping enemy or scaling a building while being shot at, you don't really want to have to worry about whether or not your character is going to accidentally leap across the street or gently lower himself onto the ledge below. Since go fast and leap from this ledge are pretty much synonymous in Assassin's games, it's most intuitive just to hold down the spacebar and hope for the best. However, this strategy proves a big problem when leaping between rooftops because you really have no idea if you're going to catch onto something or fall to your death. Some may say the system of the previous games wasn't perfect, but I'd argue that it at least allowed for fearless traversal. When playing as a badass assassin that can scale anything, you don't want to be limited to the footholds and crevices that you can visibly discern to be viable. You want to be able to throw your caution to the wind and trust your acrobatic avatar to find a way, even when you can't see it yourself. Now onto combat. In previous games, your assassin danced from target to target with parries and ripostes like it was a bloody waltz. Ripostes were fairly easy to time well, and when done correctly, you executed your enemies in a pretty fantastic fashion. In Unity, however, the combat system has changed quite a bit. Parries no longer insta-kill your enemies, but instead stun them for a small period of time. In addition, all enemies take a bit more damage to be killed and fight in larger groups than previous games. This would be okay, but because it takes longer to kill each enemy, larger groups tend to be more overwhelming, or at least more tedious to manage and defeat. This is then exacerbated by the new additions of fast-firing pistols, rifles, and alarm bells, which make enemies that you're not actively attacking all the more dangerous. Rifles and pistols are especially deadly and make fighting large crowds of enemies almost impossible, since most of the time they're firing at you from off-screen. To counter this, you're encouraged to follow a pretty narrow path through compounds of enemies to avoid dealing with too many at once. This is made harder because the AI, especially those with ranged weapons, are actually much better at finding you from far away now. All these combat changes seem to promote a more drawn-out and difficult battle compared to the low-stress equivalents in the previous games. This change didn't fit well for me because it was limiting rather than empowering for your character. If drawn into combat, I want to out-finesse my opponents quickly so I can feel powerful, not roll around in circles dodging off-screen rifle shots. Just look at the fighting in Assassin's Creed 3 in comparison. What was once offensive and fluid, with only 1 or 2 hits killing an enemy, has now become defensive and choppy, where parrying is meant to keep enemies at bay rather than finish them off. Enough about the gameplay though, let's talk about Unity's narrative. The French Revolution is such a pivotal moment in history, surely this will make for some great story. Well, not really. Let's see why. So you play as Arnaud Dorian, an assassin raised by a Templar who grows up to hunt more Templars. Yeah, that's about it. Each of your targets are identified because they might have had something to do with the death of the good Templar guy that raised you. That, and they're also Templars, the bad ones. The most disappointing thing about the story is that it has almost nothing to do with the actual French Revolution itself. The riots and executions act as a backdrop to this thoroughly unoriginal Templar witch hunt. This lack of historical attention flies directly in the face with one of the last big games of the series, Assassin's Creed 3, where you fight alongside the founding fathers in the American Revolution. This is crazy to me because the French Revolution arguably has even more opportunities to tell a good assassin story than that of the American one. Just look at Unity's E3 trailer for proof. Fighting alongside the oppressed French peasants and storming the pretty Parisian palaces of nobles to stick their head on sticks is great. Give me that. Not this.
A handkerchief. Lady's handkerchief.
So, we can count half the noble women of Paris as suspects, then?
I mean, where the American Revolution was a war, the French Revolution is about an uprising. The lower class literally storms the palaces of the rich and assassinates them. So why are we not playing as a member of the lower class doing just that? It just seems like a no-brainer to me. But no! Instead we play some noble-born British-sounding guy that has some insatiable beef with the Templars. And that brings me to my next topic. Let's talk about the issue that nobody in this game is French. Specifically, nobody that plays an integral role in the plot has any hint of a French accent. They're all just British. Honestly, if you just started playing this game, you'd have no idea where it takes place based on context clues. Even Far Cry, a series that's not known for their cultural sensitivities, does a much better job building out the world of Kyrat, with authentic Indian accents and real Hindu language and text embedded in story-centric parts of the game. The only time you hear French in Unity is from the thousands of civilian peasants that aimlessly wander every corner of the streets. Now this would be a plus, but it brings up a problem in its own right. Specifically, the fact that no critical NPC speaks or sounds French sets a clear distinction between the us of the plot-relevant characters and the them of the disposable and irrelevant peasants. Sound familiar? That's the whole premise of the French Revolution, but we're on the wrong side. It should be this, not this. This distinction isn't just evident in the voice acting though. Unlike past Assassin's games, you can't actually interact with civilian NPCs like you can with everyone else. You can't pickpocket them, you can't smack them with stuff, you can't even pet their doggies. Now Ubisoft clearly invested a lot of time and money into squeezing as many crowds as they could into the streets of Paris. But since we can't interact with them, they don't serve a purpose other than set dressing. Really, with how many of them there are, it feels more like herds of cattle roaming around arbitrary AI paths, rather than a collection of freedom-fighting civilians. That is, until their programming informs them that they've entered combat. Then they transform from a passive meat body to a superhuman sleeper cell assassin. All the same animations that you employ in fighting and executing your enemies, the civilians spontaneously obtain once their own combat switch is turned on. Besides looking goofy as hell, this sudden burst of aggression makes all of your actions a bit less impressive as a result. After all, if a farmer can take out an elite soldier with his own personal saber, what do you bring to the table with your pickaxe? As for the aesthetics, I've gotta say the art in this game is really pretty. Between the architecture, the lighting, and the costumes worn by all the characters, Unity's art department definitely did a great job. My biggest complaint though is that it seems like they've tried to fit too much of it into every single scene. Every scene is so densely packed with stuff to look at and vivid imagery that not only does it hinder the game technically and cause it to slow down and play at a low frame rate, but you can't possibly see all the things that you would want to see. It's like individually interesting models and characters are lost in the crowd, and then the whole game runs slowly as a result. So it's kind of a lose-lose. My second problem is that the UI and the alerts that keep popping on the screen are pretty intrusive compared to last games. There's always some notification in the corner saying I've earned points in something or I'm this close to achieving something else. My point is that it feels cluttered, especially when you add in all the NPCs on the screen and all the notifications of enemies either aiming at you with weapons or noticing you off screen or chasing you around corners. It's just not as cleanly executed as it is in the previous games. At the end of the day, Assassin's Creed Unity is just a game with a lot of missed potential. It's not terrible because it still feels like an Assassin's game, but it just feels poorly executed, especially compared to the previous ones in the franchise. In terms of a rating, I'd probably give this game a 6 out of 10 in fulfilling its design goals, and I conclude that if you're looking for a good Assassin's game, don't start here. If you've played all the other ones and you want to play this one too, then by all means give it a shot, but this one does it pretty poorly in comparison. Well, that's about it for my critique today. If you guys learned something new or inspired to look at something differently as a result of the video, then please leave a like and maybe a comment describing the sort of thing that you looked at differently. Also, if you guys have any suggestions on future games you'd like me to review or different elements of a game that you'd like me to talk about, then I'm happy to do that as well. My goal here is to hopefully have the comment section be a bit more discussion-oriented with this video. So if you have an opinion, if you agree or disagree with whatever I covered in this video, please share it in the comments, and then we can talk about it in a nice civilized manner, and then we'll all learn something new, and it'll be great. So please join the discussion. Next up on the chopping block is Shadow of Mordor, which many have compared Assassin's Creed to, so we'll see which one does the stabby man better. That's all for today though. If you're looking for more Assassin's Creed, check out my other funny Assassin's Creed video, and be sure to look out for that Shadow of Mordor review coming up sometime in the next couple weeks. Catch you guys later.